The cranberry sauce was still warm when my sister Michelle dropped her bombshell announcement at our family's Thanksgiving dinner. She stood up from her chair at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, like she was making a toast to her own brilliance. The dining room fell silent except for the soft clinking of silverware against china plates as 23 relatives turned their attention to her. "I have some exciting news to share with everyone," she announced, her voice carrying that familiar tone of superiority she'd perfected over the years. "I've been helping Sarah make some much-needed financial decisions that should have been made years ago." She gestured toward me with her glass, and I felt the familiar weight of nearly 24 pairs of eyes settling on me from around our extended family gathering. I continued cutting my turkey methodically, keeping my expression neutral and my movements calm. At 32, I'd learned that reacting to Michelle's declarations only fed her need for drama and attention. She was 35, married to a successful orthodontist named Brad, and had appointed herself the family's financial advisor despite having never worked outside of managing her husband's dental practice and organizing charity luncheons for their country club. "Sarah's been living in that tiny one-bedroom condo downtown for 6 years now," Michelle continued, her voice growing more animated as she warmed to her topic. "Same cramped space, same outdated kitchen with those horrible laminate countertops, never upgrading or improving her situation. She's been throwing money away on mortgage payments and property taxes when she should be building a real future." The murmurs of agreement started immediately. My cousin Jennifer nodded vigorously from across the table. "I've been saying the same thing. That place is so small you can barely fit a dining table." Michelle beamed at the support. "Exactly. So I took initiative and listed it for sale through one of Brad's patients who's a real estate agent. We got a buyer at $315,000. Which is honestly more than that little place is worth in today's volatile market. The timing couldn't be better." The table erupted in enthusiastic approval. Aunt Linda clapped her hands together with genuine excitement. "Oh Michelle, that's absolutely wonderful. Someone needs to help Sarah make practical decisions about her future." Uncle Bob, who owned 3 rental properties in the suburbs, nodded sagely from his position next to my father. "Real estate's about to crash anyway with interest rates climbing. Better to get out now while you can still make a profit." My mother practically glowed with pride as she looked between Michelle and me. "This is exactly the kind of family support we need during uncertain times. Michelle's always been so good with money and long-term planning. Remember how she helped Aunt Carol refinance her house and saved her thousands?" She turned to me with that patient, slightly condescending expression she'd worn since I was a teenager making questionable choices about college majors and career paths. "Honey, you should be grateful Michelle took charge of this situation. You've always been too sentimental about that little place, and sentiment doesn't build wealth or security." I sipped my coffee slowly and smiled peacefully. "That sounds like quite an accomplishment, Michelle. I'm sure you put a lot of thought and effort into this decision." The family interpreted my calm response as acceptance, maybe even gratitude masked by embarrassment at having my financial limitations discussed so publicly. They couldn't know that my tiny condo was registered with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network as a monitored property under federal security protocols. They had no way of understanding that any unauthorized transactions involving the property would automatically trigger federal investigation procedures that couldn't be stopped or reversed once initiated. Michelle had no possible way of knowing that I worked for FinCEN as a senior financial analyst specializing in complex money laundering investigations and international financial crime networks. My top-secret security clearance required comprehensive disclosure of all assets, investments and financial relationships. My condo's deed was flagged in multiple federal databases as belonging to someone with access to highly sensitive financial intelligence that could compromise national security if exploited. The modest one-bedroom unit I'd purchased with cash 6 years ago wasn't just my home. It was a protected federal asset under continuous monitoring systems designed to detect any unauthorized access, modification or transfer attempts. The location had been specifically chosen after extensive background investigations and security reviews conducted by federal agencies. My family saw a struggling government worker living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped downtown apartment that barely met their standards for adult living. They saw someone who drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, shopped at discount grocery stores with coupons, and never took expensive vacations to exotic destinations like the rest of the family. They assumed my government job was some low-level administrative position that barely covered my monthly bills and offered no real advancement opportunities. When relatives asked what I did for work, I always said, financial analysis for the Treasury Department, which they interpreted as boring paperwork and number crunching that anyone with basic math skills could handle. What they couldn't see was that my security clearance restricted nearly every aspect of my financial life. Where I could live, what I could purchase, how I could invest money, who I could associate with, what countries I could visit, and how I could conduct any financial transactions. Every asset I owned had to be disclosed, documented, and continuously monitored by federal security systems. The condo that looked tiny and outdated to them was strategically located within secure distance of federal facilities, purchased after months of background checks, financial audits, and security reviews by multiple agencies. The modest furnishings and lack of expensive electronics weren't signs of financial struggle. They were requirements for maintaining security clearance in sensitive positions. The closing is scheduled for next Friday at 2 p.m., Michelle continued, clearly savoring her moment as the family's problem solver and financial expert. I've already signed all the paperwork as Sarah's power of attorney, so there won't be any delays or complications. The buyers are a lovely young couple from Brad's practice. He did their dental work last year, and they're paying cash, so we don't have to worry about financing approvals or loan complications. My cousin Jennifer leaned forward with obvious interest and admiration. You have power of attorney over Sarah's finances? That's really smart planning for family emergencies and situations like this. Michelle waved her hand dismissively, as if the legal complexities were minor details hardly worth discussing. Oh, I just forged Sarah's signature on the necessary documents. She would have overthought everything and probably backed out at the last minute like she always does. Sometimes family has to make hard decisions for family members who can't see the bigger picture. The casual admission of forgery hung in the air like it was perfectly normal family business rather than a serious criminal act. Several relatives chuckled and nodded approvingly at Michelle's practical approach to family problem solving. My father actually laughed out loud and shook his head with fond exasperation. That's our Michelle, always cutting through red tape and bureaucracy to get things done efficiently. Uncle Bob raised his beer bottle in a mock toast. Sometimes you have to save people from their own poor judgment and indecision. Sarah's lucky to have someone looking out for her best interests. I took another sip of coffee and maintained my peaceful, grateful expression. Michelle had just admitted to identity theft, wire fraud, and federal property crimes in front of 23 witnesses, most of whom had encouraged or applauded her criminal behavior. She'd also committed multiple federal felonies by attempting to transfer monitored property without authorization from federal security agencies. But I said nothing about the legal implications or potential consequences. In approximately 18 hours, she would discover the severity of those choices through direct experience with federal law enforcement agencies. The rest of dinner passed with Michelle receiving continuous congratulations for her initiative and family-minded thinking. She explained in detail how she'd found the buyers through Brad's dental practice connections, how she'd skillfully negotiated the price up from their initial $290,000 offer by emphasizing the prime downtown location and investment potential, and how she planned to help me find a more suitable and appropriate rental apartment in their suburban neighborhood. Sarah can finally stop throwing money away on mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs, she declared while serving pumpkin pie with obvious satisfaction. Renting makes so much more sense for someone in her situation and at her income level. No repair worries, no property value stress, no market fluctuation anxiety. Just simple, predictable monthly payments that free up money for other priorities. My grandmother, who was 87 and had always worried about my unconventional life choices, patted my hand with genuine affection. This is such a blessing, dear. Michelle's really looking out for your best interests and long-term security. You should listen to her advice more often. The entire table murmured agreement and approval. I was surrounded by family members who truly believed they were witnessing an act of loving intervention and practical problem-solving rather than the commission of multiple federal crimes that would result in years of federal prison sentences and permanent criminal records. After dinner, Michelle pulled me aside in the kitchen while everyone else gathered in the living room to watch football and argue about politics. The kitchen was warm from cooking, and she looked flushed with wine and self-satisfaction as she loaded the dishwasher with the efficiency of someone used to managing household staff. I know this feels sudden and maybe a little overwhelming, she said with mock sympathy, adopting the patient tone she used when explaining complex financial concepts to less sophisticated people. Change is always hard to accept, especially when you've gotten comfortable with suboptimal situations. But sometimes the people who love you have to make difficult decisions that you can't see clearly yourself. I continued drying the dishes she handed me and nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should, Michelle. You've obviously put a lot of thought into this. She smiled with deep satisfaction and obvious relief that I wasn't going to cause family drama by objecting to her perfectly reasonable intervention. Exactly. That's the mature attitude I hoped you'd take. Sometimes the younger sister needs the older sister to make the tough choices that seem scary in the moment but turn out to be exactly right in the long run. She dried her hands on a kitchen towel and looked at me with the expression of someone delivering important final instructions. The closing is at 2 p.m. Friday at Stevens & Associates Law Office downtown on 5th Street. It's the same firm Brad uses for all his business contracts, so they're very professional and efficient. I'll handle everything personally. You don't even need to be there or take time off work. I'll bring all the documents to your place Friday evening so you can see everything was handled properly. Friday morning arrived gray and cold with the promise of December snow. I was at my desk at the Treasury building by 7:15 a.m., earlier than usual because I wanted to clear my caseload before the inevitable interruptions that would come later in the day. My office was on the 4th floor with a view of the Potomac River, and I spent the first 3 hours reviewing suspicious activity reports from banks across the Mid-Atlantic region. My current assignment involved tracking money laundering patterns in cryptocurrency transactions that showed signs of connection to international terrorist financing networks. The work required analyzing complex financial data, coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions, and preparing detailed reports that would be used in federal prosecutions and national security investigations. At 11:47 a.m., my personal cell phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Attorney David Stevens from Stevens & Associates. There's been an emergency situation with your property sale. Please call my office immediately. This is extremely urgent. I didn't call immediately. The word emergency in legal communications usually meant someone had discovered they were about to face serious criminal charges, and I had learned that immediate panic responses rarely improved anyone's situation. Instead, I finished analyzing a particularly complex wire transfer pattern that suggested shell company fraud involving 14 different financial institutions across 6 states, submitted my detailed report through secure federal channels, and then called the number at 12:23 p.m. Ms. Johnson, thank God you called back, Attorney Stevens said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. There are federal agents at my office right now. FBI agents with warrants. They've seized all files related to your property sale, including the original contracts, financial records, and correspondence. They're saying the transaction involves federal property fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized transfer of monitored assets. I leaned back in my desk chair and looked out at the gray December sky over the Potomac. That sounds very serious, Mr. Stevens. What exactly are they telling you? They've issued warrants for document seizure and are treating this as a major federal investigation. They want to speak with your sister immediately, and they've asked for her current location and contact information. His voice cracked slightly with stress. Ms. Johnson, I need to ask you directly. Did you authorize your sister to sign any documents on your behalf regarding the sale of your property? No, I did not authorize Michelle to sign any documents for me, Mr. Stevens. There was a long pause filled only with the sound of his rapid breathing. Oh my God. She forged your signature on federal property transfer documents. This isn't just civil fraud or family disputes. This is multiple federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. The agents are talking about wire fraud, identity theft, and violations of federal property monitoring statutes. I could hear voices in the background of his office, official and authoritative tones that I recognized from my own work coordinating with federal law enforcement agencies. Mr. Stevens, I would recommend that you cooperate fully with the federal investigation and provide whatever documentation and information the agents require. They're asking me to contact your sister immediately to inform her that federal agents want to interview her. They're also asking about the buyers and whether they were aware that this involved federal property. This is a disaster, Ms. Johnson. I could lose my license over this. At 1:23 p.m., my personal phone rang. Michelle's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Her voice was shrill with panic and confusion. FBI agents just showed up at my house with official badges and warrants. They're saying I committed federal crimes. They want to arrest me and seize my computer and financial records. I was still at my desk, calmly reviewing case files and preparing for an afternoon meeting about cryptocurrency tracking protocols. Through my window, I could see federal employees walking between buildings, conducting the routine business of national financial security. That sounds very stressful and upsetting, Michelle. Stressful? They're talking about federal prison sentences. They said something about monitored property and security violations and unauthorized transfer of federal assets. What does any of that mean? You work some boring government job doing paperwork. What security violations could possibly be involved? 2 federal agents in dark suits had indeed arrived at my sister's house at 1:15 p.m. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force and Special Agent James Park from the Treasury Department's Criminal Investigation Division had spent the morning coordinating with federal security protocols and reviewing the automatically generated investigation reports. When property registered under federal monitoring systems shows unauthorized transfer activity, automated security protocols engage within hours according to established national security procedures. The FinCEN database had flagged my condo's attempted sale at 9:42 a.m. when the title company submitted preliminary paperwork to the county recorder's office. By 10:15 a.m., federal investigators were reviewing transaction details, confirming identity theft and preparing warrants for document seizure and suspect interviews. Michelle, I said calmly, maintaining the same peaceful tone I'd used throughout our Thanksgiving dinner conversation, you admitted at dinner yesterday that you forged my signature on legal documents to sell federal property. You committed wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and attempted unauthorized transfer of monitored federal assets. Federal property? It's just your stupid little condo that nobody cares about. My condo is registered with the Treasury Department as a monitored asset under federal security protocols. Any unauthorized transactions trigger automatic federal investigation procedures that cannot be stopped once initiated. Your forged signature on transfer documents constitutes multiple federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentences ranging from 4 to 12 years in federal prison. The line went quiet except for her increasingly ragged breathing and what sounded like muffled crying. Michelle, you need to surrender yourself to federal authorities immediately and retain qualified federal criminal defense counsel. I continued in the same calm, professional tone I used when briefing law enforcement agencies about financial crime investigations. Resisting arrest, fleeing, or attempting to obstruct the investigation will result in additional federal charges that carry even longer sentences. The buyer's earnest money has been seized as evidence. The title company is under federal investigation for their role in processing fraudulent documents, and Attorney Stevens is cooperating fully with federal investigators to avoid criminal charges himself. But I was trying to help you. The whole family agreed this was the right financial decision for your future. The family's agreement doesn't override federal law, Michelle. You committed serious federal crimes in front of 23 witnesses who heard you admit to forgery and identity theft. Those witnesses will be subpoenaed to testify in federal court about what they heard you say. I could hear Agent Rodriguez's voice in the background, calm and professional, explaining Miranda rights and federal arrest procedures. Michelle was being given the opportunity to surrender voluntarily rather than be forcibly arrested, which would look better during sentencing hearings. Sarah, please, you have to stop this. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I cannot stop a federal investigation, Michelle. Federal crimes have federal consequences regardless of family relationships or personal feelings. You committed the crimes, you admitted to the crimes in front of multiple witnesses, and federal law enforcement agencies are required to prosecute those crimes. At 2:47 p.m., Michelle surrendered herself to federal authorities at the FBI field office downtown. She was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and held in federal detention pending arraignment. The charges were extensive and serious: wire fraud across state lines, aggravated identity theft, attempted federal property fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and violations of federal security monitoring statutes. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed formal criminal charges within 72 hours. Michelle faced a minimum sentence of 6 to 10 years in federal prison, plus restitution costs exceeding $85,000 for federal investigation expenses, legal fees, damages to all parties involved in the fraudulent transaction, and administrative costs for security protocol violations. The buyers, a young couple named David and Jennifer Walsh, lost their $31,500 earnest money deposit and faced their own legal complications for attempting to purchase federal property through fraudulent means. However, federal investigators determined they were unknowing victims of Michelle's scheme rather than willing participants in federal crimes. They still faced financial losses and legal fees exceeding $15,000. Attorney David Stevens faced immediate disciplinary action from the State Bar Association for failing to verify signatures on federal property documents and for not conducting proper due diligence regarding property ownership and authorization. His law license was suspended pending investigation, and his professional liability insurance company initiated legal action to recover their anticipated losses from the federal investigation. My family's reaction was predictable but still disappointing. They called me heartless and vindictive for pressing charges against my own sister over what they characterized as a simple family misunderstanding that had gotten blown out of proportion by government bureaucrats. They couldn't comprehend that I hadn't pressed any charges at all. Federal monitoring systems had automatically detected the crimes and initiated prosecution procedures according to established national security protocols. My mother called me repeatedly, crying and begging me to fix the situation by talking to my boss, or someone in charge, who could make the federal charges disappear. She couldn't understand that federal crimes don't disappear because family members ask nicely, and that my job involved investigating financial crimes rather than dismissing them. At Michelle's arraignment 2 weeks later, she appeared in federal court wearing an orange detention jumpsuit, looking pale and exhausted from her time in federal holding. She pleaded not guilty and attempted to claim she thought she was helping me make a wise financial decision that I was too emotionally attached to make myself. Federal prosecutors presented comprehensive evidence including her recorded admission of forgery at the Thanksgiving dinner, financial records showing the detailed fraudulent transaction attempts, testimony from 23 witnesses who heard her confess to multiple crimes, and expert testimony from Treasury Department security officials explaining the federal monitoring systems and why unauthorized transfers triggered automatic criminal investigation. The federal judge denied bail, citing flight risk, the seriousness of federal property fraud charges, and the potential national security implications of unauthorized access to monitored federal assets. Michelle would remain in federal detention until trial, which was scheduled for 4 months later. During the pretrial period, federal investigators discovered that Michelle had previously forged signatures on other family members' documents, including mortgage refinancing papers for our elderly aunt and unauthorized credit applications using our cousin's social security number. What had seemed like an isolated incident of poor judgment was revealed to be a pattern of financial fraud spanning several years. The additional evidence strengthened the federal case and eliminated any possibility of plea bargaining for reduced charges. Michelle's defense attorney, a court-appointed federal public defender, advised her that federal conviction was virtually certain given the overwhelming evidence and witness testimony. 3 months later, facing mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines and overwhelming evidence that included her own recorded confession, Michelle accepted a plea agreement to avoid an even longer sentence after trial. She received 6 years in federal prison, 4 years supervised probation, and court-ordered restitution of $127,000 to cover all federal investigation costs, legal fees, damages to multiple parties, and administrative expenses for security protocol violations. The federal judge explained during sentencing that crimes involving federal security protocols carried enhanced penalties because they potentially compromised national security systems designed to protect sensitive government operations and personnel. Michelle's actions had triggered expensive security reviews, protocol modifications, and enhanced monitoring procedures that cost taxpayers significant resources. My condo remained exactly where it had always been, registered under Treasury Department monitoring systems as the protected federal asset of a government employee with top-secret security clearance. The property couldn't be sold, transferred, or modified without extensive federal oversight, security reviews, and authorization from multiple agencies. The attempted fraud had actually resulted in enhanced security protocols around my property and increased monitoring of my financial activities. Federal security officials conducted comprehensive reviews of all my assets, relationships, and potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited by hostile actors seeking access to sensitive financial intelligence. I still live in my tiny one-bedroom condo downtown, still drive my 7-year-old Honda Civic, still shop at discount stores, and still take modest vacations within the United States. My family still doesn't understand that my lifestyle choices are partially dictated by security requirements rather than financial limitations, and I'm not authorized to explain the details of those requirements. The difference now is that family gatherings are much quieter and more subdued. Michelle won't be eligible for release until she's served her full federal sentence, which doesn't allow for early release or parole. The relatives who encouraged her criminal behavior now face their own financial consequences. 12 family members received federal subpoenas as material witnesses in criminal proceedings, costing them thousands in legal fees and lost work time. Several family members have faced enhanced scrutiny for their own financial activities after being associated with the federal financial crimes case. Uncle Bob's rental property business was audited by the IRS, and 2 cousins had their security clearances at their own government jobs reviewed after being connected to federal fraud investigations. My mother calls occasionally to ask when I'll forgive Michelle and help with her legal expenses and commissary money for federal prison. I explain calmly that federal crimes carry federal consequences regardless of family relationships, and that the U.S. justice system doesn't recognize family forgiveness as grounds for dismissing charges or reducing sentences. She doesn't understand that my security clearance actually prohibits me from providing financial assistance to family members convicted of federal crimes, particularly those involving financial fraud and security violations. Any such assistance would jeopardize my own career and potentially result in criminal charges against me. Last month I received a letter from Michelle at the Federal Correctional Institution where she's serving her sentence. She wrote that she finally understands she committed serious crimes with serious consequences, but she still doesn't understand why I never warned the family about the potential legal problems with their suggestions. She asked why I didn't stop her before she destroyed her own life and caused so much damage to other people. I wrote back with a simple, honest response. Federal law doesn't require warnings before prosecuting crimes. You made your choices based on your own assumptions and desires. My job was never to prevent you from making those choices or to protect you from their consequences. The letter came back 3 weeks later marked return to sender, inmate transferred. Apparently, Michelle had been moved to a different federal facility, possibly due to disciplinary issues or security reclassification. I still sip my coffee quietly at the few family gatherings I attend. I still smile and stay calm when relatives make assumptions about my life, finances, and career prospects. The difference is that now they're much more careful and hesitant about offering suggestions regarding my property, financial decisions, or life choices. Some lessons about federal law and personal responsibility can only be learned through direct experience. Federal prison provides excellent education in the long-term consequences of financial crimes, identity theft, and unauthorized interference with federal security systems. My condo remains exactly where it belongs, under federal protection and monitoring systems, just like it's always been since the day I purchased it with full disclosure to Treasury Department security officials 6 years ago.